Had an old devil pop up on me last week, kids. The old devil imposter syndrome. Maybe you've met the old devil imposter syndrome. It is not a pleasant thing to meet out there. Popped back up on me last week, took me a little bit by surprise, and so I thought this week I would talk about what imposter syndrome is, how I have confronted it in my life, how we might deal with it moving forward. Really, I hope, useful episode for those of you out there who struggle with the self-doubt, who want to get past it. I want you to know you're not alone. I've got some stuff to say about it. I've borrowed the wisdom, as always, of much smarter people than me. And we'll get to it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. I haven't done the avoidance dance on recording quite as intensely in a long time as I have been this morning. I've been literally in my improvised recording space, which is still my jam space, because the renovation is freaking still not done. And I've been just doing the avoidance dance. That's this move I do where I just kind of wander around the jam space, doing everything except recording the episode. There are times when I just really struggle to find my way in, and this is one of those times. And I'm not even sure why. They're just sometimes I have an opening line in mind, and from there, the thing just sort of spins out into existence. To the extent that I can, I try very hard to be just a conduit for the words here. And that sounds highfalutin and elevated. I don't mean it to. It's just a lot of times I just need that opening line, and then it unfolds. But in this case, today I'm talking about something that is a little bit more academic, something which I do not have academic expertise in. I have a certain amount of experiential expertise in, and it's just hard for me sometimes to figure out what on earth I'm even going to say. But something very strange happened to me last week, all right? If you follow me on the socials, you know about this. So last week, I was putting up a teaser for last week's episode number 163. Right now, I do this every week. Part of the game is you've got to promote the freaking episodes, especially if you're me and you are essentially nobody from nowhere and barely anybody knows you freaking exist, all right? If you are Julia Louis-Dreyfus and you're a mega freaking celebrity with a zillion followers, promoting your podcast, not that difficult to do. And by the way, you've probably got a staff who's doing that for you anyhow. And so it is with anybody who's at that level. The rest of us who are your indies, who are your quote unquote small fish, we got to do all that stuff ourselves. And it is pulling teeth, kids, trying to get people to come on and listen to your freaking program, especially if they don't know who you are or don't know you personally. It's a difficult freaking game. And so one of the things you do is you do an audiogram where I clip a little piece of the episode and I put it up on the internet for people to hear, and you cross your fingers hoping that it will entice them to come and listen to the rest of the episode. And you put a whole bunch of hashtags on your Instagram, and nobody who's not already following you sees it anyways. I don't know what's going on with Instagram, but I try my freaking best, and it doesn't seem to amount to much. And then I'll do just like a quote teaser. So it'll be a quote from the episode, and it will have a picture that runs behind it. And there is where I ran into this bizarre phenomenon last week, all right? So I was doing a teaser for the section of last week's episode where I answered the question about 3 songs that I've recorded that illustrate my drumming style okay. And I felt weird about that anyways. I still exist in this world where I'm very just sort of antsy about talking about myself, which I know causes a certain amount of cognitive dissonance because it's all I freaking do anymore. But it's what's on my mind, and it seems to be what's coming up for me. It's this stuff related to personal development and my own weaknesses and how I deal with that and whatever. And I hope, and I have anecdotal evidence to suggest that it helps other people out there too, and that's an admirable and good thing, right? But I still struggle. Partly as the legacy of the ego breakdown that I endured during COVID, all right? I still struggle with this notion of being seen, and I still struggle with this notion of appearing as though I'm trying to be seen. So some of that informs what I'm about to talk about, which is this concept of imposter syndrome, all right? And this popped up for me last week when I was doing this teaser for that section of the podcast episode. Okay, I pulled a quote from that section about my approach to writing drum parts. That's fine. And then I was looking for a photograph to run with that. And I had a few options, okay? There have been various photographs taken of me in the studio throughout my career, such as it is. And that's fine, and some of them are cool, and that's great. And then I have other pictures that I would take from behind the drum kit. We call those in the drumming world driver's seat photos. So I'm sitting on the throne, and you see the drums from my perspective. You see the room from my perspective. And if you are playing like for an audience and stuff, those are cool photos. You see other drummers do them. In fact, the wallpaper on my smartphone is a collage of drummer driver's seat photos. And that's drums looking out at stadium crowds or big crowds here and there, or interesting rooms or cool venues. And it's kind of like one of those vision boards, you know. At a certain point in time, I developed this little everyday digital vision board where I just see drummer driver's seat photos of big crowds, big rooms, you know, because I want to play those and I want to have those experiences. And I will say that the photo in the middle of that collage is one that I actually took from my drum set at London Music Hall, which I think was the night Hearts was opening for Nazareth. And there was a full, 800 or 900 people, whatever it is that capacity was at the time there. And it's a full room and we're playing it. And it was like, we're on the cusp of the dream here. We're experiencing it just a little bit, you know. And so I would take photos like that in the studio to put up on the internet to tell everybody that I'm recording. And I have cognitive dissonance about that now too. Like it's possible, and it's happened to me, I think, that the pendulum swings too far the other way. So I had this ego breakdown during COVID where the anxiety just blew me open. And it taught me that I need to begin working from a less egoic place, not a place of arrogance, but a place of wanting my ego to be fluffed, wanting my tires to be pumped, you know? And so you put photos like that on the internet, partly to let everybody know that you're a drummer who records. I mean, that is just advertising, all right? That is what a business has to do. It's like, hey, I'm a recording drummer. If you happen to need one, maybe talk to me. And then you do that, and then I'll panic because I have imposter syndrome, and I'll freak out, right? But also you put those photos on the internet because you want the attention, you want the likes, you know what I mean? And that's not really a bad thing, except if you develop this lifestyle and this attitude whereby everything you do is for the gram. Everything you do is for that external validation, is for that attention, right? And when I had this ego breakdown, it was brought to me, it was brought into my attention that a lot of what I work from is to have this external validation because I don't feel it in myself, right? And it was a call to me to lay that down and to begin working from a higher place, to begin working from a spiritual place, and I am still working on that, right? And so some of the issue I have with putting out a photo of anything anymore is pulling back and questioning that motivation, you know? And so I've got these photos of the studio, drummer, driver seat photos. I have photos of me performing, and this should not be all that difficult, all right? There's a section of my podcast where I talked about songs that I recorded, and so it follows that I would have a picture of me in the studio recording to run behind a quote about that. Makes a certain amount of sense, right? It is possible, and I am guilty of this, to overthink these things, but there was something much deeper at work here. And so I'm in my software, and I'm putting this teaser together, and I'm pulling in pictures to run behind the quote, and really struggling in a way that I don't normally under these circumstances. Usually, it's pretty seamless. All right, cool photo. There's the quote. Put it up. Fine. But really, really difficult this time. And so I had a picture, drummer driver seat, and it was cool, but it didn't really quite work within the template. I was like, try another one. Coloring didn't work. It just didn't look good to me. And then I drop in a photo of me, taken by somebody else, I think my spouse or significant other, and it was from the Bone Music recording sessions, all right? Hiroshima Heart's Bone Music EP, and one of the songs that I talked about on that episode was from that EP. And so doesn't it make sense to have a photo of me recording that EP to run behind the quote for that section? Makes a certain amount of sense, but I dropped it in and I just stopped cold. And I'm like, I can't use this. Now, I am reluctant to put photos of my face on these teasers. Now, partly that is, again, to do with the ego breakdown and this trepidation, this fear I have developed of seeming to want to be seen. And I am still working through that. And this is where maybe the pendulum has swung too far the other way. Like I'm way too vigilant about this now, but there's something more at work here. And it had to do with me talking about drumming. And it was this really visceral reluctance to put my face behind a quote about playing the drums. And it's because I still do not feel qualified to talk about playing the drums or recording the drums or being a drummer. There is within me still a certain heavy imposter syndrome. And I thought I was over this, all right? This has existed from the moment I stepped into this world and started playing the drums publicly again. Right? I'm playing in my basement 20 years ago, having a good time, messing around, playing with records, even jamming with a couple of friends. You know what I mean? No big deal. There's nothing public about that. There's nothing out there. But when I stepped in about 10, 11 years ago, when I stepped back into playing publicly and playing with people, it was accompanied by an intense sense of imposter syndrome. Do you know what that is? I'm sure you've heard the term before. Imposter syndrome is basically just this sense that you are a fraud at whatever it is you're trying to do, and a fear that other people are going to find out you're a fraud. And it runs through your mind all the time that you are not good at this, you're not good enough at this, and it's only a matter of time before people figure out you're not good enough at this and they're going to call you out on it. And you're going to be exposed, and this just runs in your head, right? This sense of being an imposter. It's me with almost everything, to be honest. Me with drums in particular. I was so far, I felt, out of my depth and in so far over my head. And playing with these people who were really good and experienced, and then being in studios with professional producers and engineers who have worked with like real players, you know? And so I developed this self-deprecation that ran through any drumming situation. It's like I would have this sort of make jokes about myself, downplay myself. This kind of weird wink to everybody that I know. I know I'm not very good. You know I'm not very good. We can agree on that without saying it. And it just undercuts everything. And it was undercutting everything I did. And for many years, it was always in the back of my mind. I'm not good enough for this stage. I'm not good enough for these players. I'm not good enough for whatever is going on right now. And I would hedge and I would hide and I would have this fear that sooner or later they're going to find out I'm not very good. And who the hell am I to even be in this position? And over time, I've had to reckon with that. I mean, music has been such an amazing crucible for me. An amazing crucible for drawing out and facing so many of my demons. And that's been attachments. It has been this self-doubt. It has been this imposter syndrome. It's been a hell of a ride, man. It has been at times an extraordinarily difficult ride. But I thought I was getting past it. And to a certain extent, I am. I reached a point where I began more to recognize my strengths, what I do bring to the program, what I do at a high enough level, and in certain situations, I do really, really well. I'm not a prog drummer. I'm not a gospel chops guy. I recognize that, but there are things that I do well. And I've begun over time to become more comfortable with myself as a player, with myself as a drummer. And I keep getting hired and I keep getting to record things for people. All right. And so I was getting there. And so it struck me, and it was really surprising that last week I've got this quote that's about me as a drummer. And suddenly I can't put my face behind it. And all this stuff began to pop up again. I can't speak about being a drummer. And who do I think I freaking am? And I was rolling my own eyes at this notion of me being a recording drummer, as if I'm actually that. And me being a performing drummer and a working drummer, as if I'm actually that. And there's a lot of times that I've got to kind of talk myself out of, that's not even the right terminology. It's like I refer to myself all the time as a working drummer. And I wear that as a badge of honor. And partly, that's true. And it's what I am. But other times, I use that in lieu of I'm a professional drummer, which I'm not. But it's like I use this working drummer term almost as a way to deflect from my weaknesses. All I am is a working drummer. I'm a meat and potatoes guy, right? And it is downplaying myself. And okay, this is not new for me. But having this pop up so viscerally last week, like I can't put my face. I am hiding. I called it digital hiding. I'll put up a picture of a studio with my quote on it. And in that way, have less ownership of it, or put some separation between myself and appearing to think that I'm a drummer. Appearing to think that I'm a working or recording drummer. Again, this wink to the world that says, I'm not good enough. I know it. You know it. We don't need to say it. We can just move on. And I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that. And it shook me. And it shook me a little bit. And it brought back into focus this lack of self-belief that continues to undercut so much of my life. And it is twisted now in with this COVID breakdown thing, this ego breakdown thing that says, do not be seen, do not be visible, do not appear to want attention from everybody. Now, there's a lot that I'm still working my way through, but this imposter syndrome thing is not unique to me, all right? Now, I heard a stat out there in poking around looking into this that says something like 70% of people have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their life. And that could be they started a new job and they felt way out of their depth, or they started school or took a class or whatever and found themselves really doubting their ability, like really looking over their shoulder, like, I can't believe I'm in this position. I'm not comfortable here, and they're going to find out. I think, frankly, that the 70% number is probably low. I think it's closer to like 99% probably. But not for all of those people is this a chronic thing, right? So the authority, the public kind of face of imposter syndrome is this woman called Dr. Valerie Young. And she dropped a book a little while back called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. I'm not a successful woman, but I think this is somewhat universal. And Dr. Valerie Young is kind of the academic voice on this. And if you go onto YouTube, she did a great TEDx talk about this. She's done a whole bunch of interviews as part of publicizing this book. And there's a website, impostersyndrome.com, which is run largely by Dr. Valerie Young and her people, which is a wealth of resources about this from an academic perspective, okay? But she's the authority, and she's the person to go to if you want a more clear, clinical, academic explanation of what this is. But I bet you felt it. I bet at some point in your life, you have felt this imposter syndrome. And if you're one of the lucky few for whom that is a momentary or a temporary thing, God love you. Good for you, man. But for me, it is not that. And what is imposter syndrome anyways? Signs, according to the research, that you may have this. You are sensitive to criticism. I am enormously sensitive to criticism, particularly in the area of drumming. It's not that I think I'm right all the time, but it's like if somebody calls me out or somebody makes a suggestion or somebody is critical of a thing, I take that so freaking personally, man. It's like I freeze inside. I'm getting better because, again, I'm developing more confidence in my own vision, developing more confidence in what I do. But the initial reaction, intensely visceral, man. You sometimes downplay your ability. That is me to a T. Ever since I was a kid, ever since I was a child, I have downplayed or talked down my ability. And part of that is not seeming to appear arrogant. That was pounded into me as a kid about this humility and whatever. That pendulum can swing too far as well, It's like you're allowed to own when you're good at something. Doesn't mean you walk around flaunting it or throwing it in people's faces. There is such a thing as arrogance and being conceited. Not what we're talking about, but you can be proud of and comfortable with and acknowledge your own ability to do something. I wasn't taught that. I was taught excessive humility, and so I talked myself down, downplayed myself, right? You agonize over the smallest details. And this happens to me all the time. Like I said before, I can't listen to things that I've recorded. I really struggle to listen to things I recorded because what I hear is that one little thing that could have been better or wasn't quite in the kind of time that I was looking for. Or, geez, I should have done this or I should have done that. Or if I get done playing a gig, this has been, again, I'm getting better at this, but it's chronic for me to get to the end of a gig that was great and be absolutely crestfallen because of the one thing that wasn't. The one little screw up I made, or the one bit that was not quite in time, or the one, but this drives me crazy when I hear recordings of something and there's like a vocal harmony that was just a little bit off or not quite right, or might not even be me, There could be four of us singing, but it might be, and I just drives me nuts, And so you nitpick over the smallest freaking details of a thing, and 99% of it could be great. And that 1% is what keeps you up at night. Now, there is something to be said for having standards. There is nothing wrong with aspiring to perfection, but there is something wrong with getting it 99% right and then having your night ruined by the 1%. And that is me. And why do you do that? It's because you are conditioned in your mind to see only the parts where you're not good enough, right? You are an imposter. You know you're not good enough. And so that 1% is all that jumps out because that's what your mind's looking for. Your mind is looking for the evidence to prop up the beliefs you have about yourself. And so if you believe you're not good enough, the one thing you will notice is the thing that props up your belief that you're not good enough. And this is devastating for you, man. This is devastating for your psychology. And I'll tell you a freaking secret. Everybody screws up. All right, there is a video that I freaking love. Back early 2000s, King's X, my favorite band of all time, is on tour supporting, I think it was their Please Come Home, Mr. Bulbous record. And there's a song on that record called Bittersweet. It's just, that's a down record, okay? That album found King's X kind of lost in the wasteland of their career. Really struggling, broke. The bubble had never quite filled up, and what it had done was burst. And they were kind of drifting, and they're putting out these experimental records, midpoint of their career, which all had highlights, but they were criticized by people because they weren't Gretchen Ghost in Nebraska. And Ty, the guitar player, was going through a divorce, and it looked just kind of bleak. And so there's a darkness to some of these records, right? And so one of the songs on Bulbous is called Bittersweet, and it's this really sad, melancholy, wistful song written by Ty Tabor, going through this darkness. And it's a beautiful but a really devastating and sad song. Short little ballad. And so there's video of the band performing this song on that tour. And they're playing through it, and it's freaking, the whole audience is weeping. And I love you, thinking of you, bittersweet. And then it comes to this really emotional part of the song. And Ty's playing the guitar part, these chords. And then at a certain point, he just is one fret off. And so instead of this really beautiful, sad chord, he hits clang, just this awful, dissonant, horrendous chord, which junks the whole song beyond. It's just hilarious, actually. And the whole band just stops. And then in the midst of this incredibly sad song, there's just enormous laughter. This incredible moment where it's just like, I couldn't have got that more wrong. And then there's a discussion on stage of that chord and what it is. Wow, look at the difference between this position and that position on the fretboard and how much that wrecks things. And this conversation goes on for a little bit. And then Doug's like, oh, we're going to have to write a song with that chord in it, obviously, at some point. Yeah. And then they go back in and finish the song, right? And they come to the end and it slows down. And of course, the last chord of the song is that chord that Ty junked before. And it's like slows down, denouement. And when he comes down to that last chord, he goes to the wrong fret and hits the clanger again. And everybody laughs their heads off. And that's the point. Even people at that level screw up. It is not unique to you, but I don't think Ty Tabor went to bed that night just focused on how horrendous that was and being terrified and anxious and depressed because they're all going to find out. They're all going to find out. It's obvious now that I'm not good enough and I'm terrible and I shouldn't be here. And how dare I even step onto that freaking stage? That would be me. Ty Tabor is a freaking guitar god. He knows what he's got. He knows what he can do. He's Ty freaking Tabor. And so you laugh about that. And suddenly you've got this really memorable moment in your show. And it's one of the things I've learned, by the way, kids. If you do screw up on a show, stand up, take a freaking bow. People love that. People love that human part of what you're doing. So yeah, I become absolutely fixated on the one little bit that doesn't quite go right. Do you have self-doubt? Are you self-critical? That's me all the time. And sometimes that's okay. I mean, self-doubt can be healthy, and sometimes when you're stepping into a new situation, yeah, you're going to have imposter syndrome, and that's okay. One of the things that I talk about is that you've got to become the sort of person who can. I've spoken about this on the program before. You've got to become the sort of person who can play for 1,000 people. That was not me when I stepped back into music. First gig I played was in a basement of a club to like 30 people, and I freaked the F out for weeks before we played that show, all right? Fast forward 6-7 years, I've got hundreds of shows under my belt, and I can walk out in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people and play and not be nervous at all. You've got to become the sort of person who can. And so it's okay to feel a certain amount of imposter syndrome, but this self-doubt thing can be really, really chronic. And it can undercut everything you freaking do. And you spend your life like a freaking squirrel, just in a panic all the time because you're waiting for people to find out. You're waiting for this punishment to come. You're waiting for this consequence to happen that nobody else is even paying attention to, man. Are you reluctant to promote yourself? Oh, here we go. And that's this story, right? That is this story. I am reluctant to put my face on something that talks about drumming because I do not feel qualified to do that. I do not feel good enough. And I am terrified on this reptilian, visceral level of real drummers seeing me talking about playing the drums and rolling their eyes about that. Like, who the hell does this guy think he is? Does he not get that he's crap? Really? Is he trying to pass himself off as somebody who knows something about playing the drums? What a freaking joke. And the thing about that, the really interesting thing about that kind of reaction is it is not about anybody else at all. It's about you, man. That is the sort of reaction I would be tempted to have in a situation like that. Because I can be petty and awful. I'm getting better. I'm growing up, kids. When I was very, very much younger, that might have been my reaction to somebody. And it would be probably just because I was masking my own sense of inadequacy, right? How dare they step out that way? Wish I was confident enough to do it. You know what I mean? And so you can put onto other people the reaction that you would have, right? And so if you fear this sort of disdainful reaction from people, check yourself. Stop and say, is that how you would react? Because you're really pointing the finger back at yourself. You're really learning, if you want to, some of your own thought processes. Because most people, I'll tell you a secret, kids, most people don't give a crap what you do or what you say or what you put on the internet. Most people don't even freaking care. It's just you, if you're like me, who is wrapped up in this stuff, right? And that's an ego thing as well. So much of this is an ego thing. Are you reluctant to promote yourself? Yeah, I'm reluctant to promote myself, partly because I have not yet drawn the lines between working from ego and not working from ego, but partly, and in large part, because I do not feel like I have what it takes. I can't back up the promotion when it comes to drumming, right? I can promote the podcast, I can do this, I can do whatever. But when it comes to drumming, and it's an indication that it really matters to me, I don't promote myself at all, really, because again, this imposter syndrome, this feeling that, I could put myself out there as a drummer and then suddenly be offered an opportunity that I don't think I can handle, man. And that sparks again, that's enormous fear of being found out. Fear that other people are going to see me as I see myself. Fear that other people are going to talk to me as I talk to myself. And this is not healthy, but it's informative. If you can begin to turn this around and see other people reacting to you the way you react to yourself, you begin to understand just how toxic your internal dialogue is. Are you reluctant to promote yourself? Yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yes, I am. Because I fear not being able to handle the opportunities that might come. And I wonder right now if this is popping up for me because a part of me wants to go to another level. You know, part of me wants to move up the ladder, such as it is. In the drumming world, part of me would like a chance to tour bigger. Part of me would like a chance to push it a little bit higher. Part of me fears that I've hit my ceiling as a player. Maybe I have, I don't know. But I wonder if I'm confronting this right now because part of me wants to push through and I'm afraid to do that. And I don't know, it could be, it could not be, but for some reason this is coming up for me right now and it's forcing me to confront again this self-doubt, this imposter syndrome. And it's really important to look at that. Yes, I'm reluctant to promote yourself. Another clue that you may have imposter syndrome. Do you hold yourself back? Do you hold yourself back? And it's part of the same overall concept of not promoting yourself. So if an opportunity comes along, let's say there's a job opens up in your company that is a promotion, 100% it's a promotion, and you may be qualified to do it. Do you apply or do you not apply? And if you don't apply, do you tell yourself stuff like, oh, it would interfere with my lifestyle too much, or I would have to work with this team or that team, or. And do you know deep down inside that those are BS excuses and that the real truth is that you're afraid you might not be able to freaking handle it? Do you hold yourself back? I have done it in the past as a drummer, way back in the early days, when opportunities were there to play with people and I came up with reasons why I couldn't. Held myself back. Why? Didn't think I was good enough. Thought I might get found out. Thought I might have to face that humiliation. Again, that's an ego thing. That is your ego not wanting to be compromised, man. Do you hold yourself back? Yeah, I have. Do you sabotage yourself? That's an interesting one. I'm going to go to this audition. You're an actor, you're a musician, whatever. I've booked this audition and I woke up with the sniffles today. I can't. I got to cut the grass. Do you sabotage yourself? Do you shoot yourself in the freaking foot? Or do you show up and then play really badly? You know, play really badly. That serves a couple of important functions. A, it props up again this belief you have about yourself that you're not good enough. And B, it ensures that you won't get the gig. Do you play badly? Do you sabotage yourself? Ask yourself these questions with any opportunity that comes along, you know? Do you sabotage that? And is it legit or is there more to it? Are you avoiding it? I mean, this happens all the time in the music world, where you go to bulletin boards where people are advertising, or on Facebook, there'll be groups and be like, drummer needed for this project, DM me. And then it happens all the time, man. Everybody wants to jam. But then on jam day, they don't freaking show up. This happens all the time, man. They schedule it, they're coming, and then for whatever reason, they call an hour before and say they can't make it. This happens all the time. Is that self-sabotage? Sometimes it's legit. Sometimes it's legit. A comet hit your house. Can't make it, kids. A lot of the time, it's self-sabotage. It's holding yourself back, and it is imposter syndrome, man. All of these things happen. Where do they come from? The academic work says maybe you grew up in a family with really critical parents. I mean, I grew up in the evangelical church. It was nothing but criticism. You couldn't do anything right. You couldn't do a damn thing right in that place, man. Everything you did was wrong. You were trained from the second you were born to see yourself as unworthy, because that's the principle of the whole freaking place. You need to be saved. You need to be redeemed. You are, just by your very nature, bad, sinful, undesirable, evil. How do you not develop imposter syndrome if you're taught from the time you're born that you're bad, that you're evil, and that you need saving? Right, so I got a layer of that going. That's cool. And you're criticized all the freaking time. Maybe you were criticized too, Or maybe you grew up in a house where you were compared to your siblings Maybe you had an older sibling who was the golden freaking child. Maybe you got a younger sibling who was the golden freaking child, or who has some freakish superpower, or was really great at something, or your older brother was a really terrific athlete. And you're not so much of an athlete, but your parents loved it, and he's got all the freaking medals. He's got all the trophies, and every Saturday you were at your brother's game where he was the star. And what you're really good at is math, and they don't seem to be giving out medals for that. Or maybe there were superstars in your neighborhood, or maybe your own parents had their own sense of imposter syndrome. And so they looked at everybody else's kids and how great they were, and you, by comparison, couldn't measure up there. And their own sense of inadequacy put that on you. It made you feel like you don't compare, or you're not as good as the other kids in the neighborhood or in your class. I can remember a hilarious thing. Perception is so important. And the pressure we learn to put on yourselves. When I was in high school, I was not a great student, okay? I was not a diligent student, and I didn't care, and I still don't. There are classes I did well in, and I can remember one time getting like a really high mark on a history exam. I pulled like an 88 or something like that. I was good at history, kids, okay? It's why I went and did a degree in it. And so I'm sitting at the back of the room, jackass that I am, laughing my head off because I got like an 88 on this thing. Great, good mark. Isn't that freaking hilarious? Let's all celebrate. Get out the balloons. There's another person in my class who was an extraordinarily high achiever academically, like 90s in freaking everything, and felt that. All right, this person felt that. And I don't know if it was like enormous pressure from home. I don't know if that was self-imposed pressure. I don't know what the psychology was there. But this person got the same mark as me and was devastated. Like head in hands, tears, devastated to have gotten an 88 on something. Yokel over there, me, I'm dancing in the aisles for an 88. And that's a good mark, kids. But it's weird the pressure you put on yourself, you know? And so if you grew up in a place, in a world that came with that kind of pressure, yeah, you might feel like an imposter. Or maybe you're a person who it just came really, really easy, right? I see this probably happens with athletes all the freaking time, right? You grew up with people who are just freakishly good. I grew up playing hockey poorly, but with people who were really, really good. You know, at 5 years old, could just skate like lightning and stick handle, and they were already 3 inches bigger than everybody. And you look at that person, and you're like, that kid's going someplace. And for the next 6, 7, 8 years, that kid dominates the hell out of every league they play in. Big fish, small pond, right? And it's like, that kid's going pro. He's 9 years old and he's already 5'7", and it's like, he's going pro, skating circles around everybody. But the further they go up the ladder, you know, they reach a point where, oh, wait a minute, everybody's this naturally gifted. And then all of a sudden, they're 15, 16, they get drafted into junior or something like that, and they're not the star anymore. They're a third liner, they're a fourth liner. And suddenly, you reach a certain point where the only way to make it in this league is to fight. Every favorite goon you've ever had on your NHL team at a certain point in time was the star of their freaking league. But as the air gets thinner, this natural ability that they have doesn't cut it anymore. And that is a way to develop imposter syndrome. Like, I was the best forever, just naturally, didn't even have to work at it. Then all of a sudden you're not anymore. And you're like, oh, I don't belong here. I don't understand. This doesn't work for me anymore. I don't get it. Why am I not the best? And that can really affect your psychology, right? All of these things can contribute to this sense of imposter syndrome, this sense that you're not good enough, this sense that you're fooling everyone, this sense and this fear that you're going to be found out. And what do you do about that? Because that's what it really comes down to, right? What do you do if you suffer from this imposter syndrome? And it is suffering. It is suffering. I have suffered with it myself. It is an awful feeling. The anxiety that accompanies, the depression that can accompany, the way you hold yourself back and then beat yourself up for holding yourself back, the way you sabotage yourself and then beat yourself up for sabotaging yourself. It all feeds into this toxic cycle of not being good enough, not being good enough, not being good enough, and nobody cares. 99% of the time, nobody freaking cares. What do you do about it? First thing you do, I think, is challenge the beliefs that you have. No, there's a step before that. The step before that is to critically look at the situation and recognize whether, you do need to improve. All right? That's important. Sometimes you just actually aren't good enough. Sorry, kids. That's like those athletes. It's like I got this far on my natural ability, and now I'm at this level, and I'm not as good as people. I'm not like, and this must be devastating. You see this in the soccer world all the time. You watch it in your team. If you follow a big club, like I follow Arsenal, it's one of the biggest freaking clubs in the world, all right? Their academy got kids in at 6, 7 years old, right? From the time they're literally 6 years old, they're signed to Arsenal. And they join and they play all the way through the youth ranks with Arsenal, developing as a player, right? And you think, I'm headed for the bigs. I'm going to be in the starting 11 for Arsenal one day. 9 out of 10 of them, maybe even 9.5 out of 10 of them, never make the first team at Arsenal. Then you reach a point in your career and your development where you're like, I'm not good enough to play for this club. And then you have to, like, that's got to be a devastating moment where you realize you're not going to make it at Arsenal because you play on the right wing and Bukayo Saka is playing above you. You're just not going to make it, right? And that's got to be devastating. But it doesn't mean it's over for you. It means that there's an opportunity maybe at a different team where the competition's not quite as fierce. You know, you can still have a career. You can still be successful. It's possible. I'm loath to use the term you find your level, but you find your level. And that's got to be really, really difficult to do. Now, me as a drummer, I have to look objectively. Am I good enough? Well, for certain things, no, I'm not. Like there's stuff that I have to improve if I want to push to the next level. You know, in a perfect world, I'll go to the next level with somebody. You know, somebody I'm playing with now, we will grow together into the next level, and I'll have the opportunity to develop, you know, become the sort of person who can. And you have to step back though and say, do I actually need to improve? Do I have really the experience, credentials, qualifications for that manager's job I want? And if you don't, it's not imposter syndrome to say that you don't and then work towards developing those things. So be objective if you can and say, do I actually need to improve to do this thing I want to do? And if you do, then you set about improving. You take more drum lessons. You focus in on specific skills. You go and learn things. You go get the credential you need. That's totally legit, and that is very mature, okay? But then challenge your beliefs, though. Am I actually good enough and just not acknowledging it? Do I have the ability? Again, what's the story? What's the truth? You know, begin to step back and challenge that. And then stop and ask yourself this other two vitally important things. Does it matter? Ultimately, this is an ego thing, man. It is your ego that does not want to be humiliated. But you go all the way back to your reptilian brain. It's a fear of death. You know, being kicked out of the community at a certain point in time meant death for you. You depended on the community. That's why we grew up to be cooperative social creatures, man. Some of that still exists in you. Some of that's in your DNA. You know, rejection meant death at a certain point in time. Doesn't anymore. And so if you go to that audition as an actor, if you go to that audition as a player, and you don't get the gig because you're not good enough, okay, that's it. That's as far as it needs to go. Or if you get the gig and you wind up getting let go from that gig because you're not good enough, or for whatever reason, Okay. Did anybody die? Unless you are in the medical field, imposter syndrome is probably not life and death, okay? And you can begin to take it less freaking seriously because you remember the wisdom of the Terminator. In 100 years, who's gonna care? In 100 years, who's gonna care? You can pull yourself back from that ledge, man. Pull yourself back from this being life and death. And so, maybe I will audition for an act that's touring at a level that's beyond where I've been before. And maybe I won't get that because I'm not a good enough player. That will sting. That will hurt my ego. I'll probably be down for a few days about it, and I'll probably begin to go down that spiral of self-doubt and self-loathing, and I'm not good enough, and here's the proof. And hopefully pull myself back out of it, because it's not all that important, really, is it? It's just not life and death most of the time. And so you can step back from all this and say, okay, there's stuff that I need to improve, and I can set about improving it. And I can go after these chances, and I can try. And if I fail, it's not that big a deal, especially if you've got your ego in check. Okay, I wasn't good enough. They know I'm not good enough for that particular gig at that particular time. Doesn't mean I can't get good enough. You put yourself in the freaking game. I'm going to give you the wisdom of Theodore Roosevelt, the famous speech that former President Theodore Roosevelt made in Paris. I'm just looking up the exact date of this. 1910, April 23rd, in Paris, the gregarious former President Theodore Roosevelt spoke to a crowd of like 25,000 people in Paris. And it's the man in the arena speech. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Do not be lukewarm, children. Put yourself freaking out there. At the end of the day, this fear is largely based on ego. And if it isn't, it's worth examining, all right? If you feel this intense fear, that's worth inquiring into. What is the fear? Is it a fear that your dad's going to be proven right? That you're a little weakling after all, and you're not freaking good enough? Is it a fear of just being humiliated again or being bullied? At a certain point, these fears they hurt, man, but they can be superficial. They can be about freaking ego, man. And I think the way to deal with imposter syndrome is to be objective about it. Recognize where you need to improve and set about improving. And put yourself in the freaking arena, just like Theodore Roosevelt said, man. I'm going to give you a quote from no less than the great Leanne Mayer herself, singer-songwriter extraordinaire Leanne Mayer, because I posted up a video where I requested feedback from people. Have you ever had imposter syndrome? What did you do about it? Pleased to report that almost nobody in my audience appears to have suffered from that before, so good for you. Leanne Mayer, singer-songwriter, it's all mindset, she says. Shake it out and refocus your thoughts to positive. We've all been there. Just don't stay there. That's so important. We've all been there. Just don't stay there. And this goes back to last week's episode about the churn. You've got to pull yourself out of these things. And if there's stuff that you aspire to, then freaking go at it, man. go at it. And if you get knocked back, try to be objective. You're allowed to feel it. You're allowed to feel the pain that accompanies that, but then stop and say, okay, I didn't get this drum chair, or I got let go from this drum chair. There's an issue with my playing. Sometimes it's not that. Most times it's probably not that. It's some weird whim or who knows what. But if it's legit an issue with your performance, then, you've got to have some humility and you've got to step back and say, okay, it doesn't mean I'm no good. It just means there's stuff that I need to improve, and that's fine and that's healthy. This happens all the time in every aspect of everything, right? It's why a player gets drafted at 18 who's a freaking superstar in junior and then has to go spend 2 years in the minors before he makes the big team. You got to get better. Even if you are at that level of potential, you've got to develop that potential, And so here I am feeling imposter syndrome because I talked about recording songs as though I'm any sort of a drummer. And I am so loath to appear as though I think I'm better or further along than I am. But the truth is, I did record those songs. And you can love them or hate them, or think I'm a crap drummer or not a crap drummer. I still did it. And so, to that level at least, I have some insight on how to write drum parts, okay? Other people have more insight than I do. I'm not saying that they don't. I am not Todd Zuckerman. I am not Vinny Colaiuta. All right? I'm not pretending that I am. And most people don't give a crap anyways. Things are way less important and vital to other people than they are to you. I'm pushing this now, I think, far enough. The point is, imposter syndrome is out there. It's in me. And I think it's in most of us, man. And for the most part, 99 times out of 100, it doesn't matter. You can go for it. You can do your freaking thing. And if you need to improve, simply try to improve, But do not absorb this into your self-concept. You can look objectively and say, okay, my drumming is not up to snuff for this particular gig. That does not mean that you are an unworthy human being, right? This is one aspect. And one of the things I've been working so hard at, with respect to this not working from ego anymore, is just accepting my own value as a human being, quite apart from whatever the achievements are, whatever the public stuff is, and not working from a point where that needs to be satisfied and fulfilled. If you have imposter syndrome and you fear being caught out, that is your ego fearing, being humiliated. But if you begin to not work from ego so much anymore, if you begin to look at, say, music from a spiritual perspective and you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to land in the places where I fit. There's a gig out there that I can do really, really well. I haven't found it yet, but I'm not a failure. I just haven't found the right gig yet. And I'm going to work on my performance. I'm going to work on my playing, my acting, my art, my singing, my poetry, my writing, whatever. And I'm going to find the place where I fit. And I have faith in a power in the universe to help me find that. It's a much more healthy way of doing it than to look at it and say, here's the proof that I'm not good enough and it keeps popping up over and over. I'm not even going to try anymore. And I'm just going to hide over here, going to hide my light under a bushel because my ego fears being called out. I have suffered from that. And suffering is the word, man. And I don't want to suffer that way anymore. I don't want you to suffer that way anymore. And so if you've got the imposter syndrome, just hopefully take some of this to heart, approach it in a different way, and get past it, man. Be the man, woman, whatever, in the arena. Be in the arena, because good things happen when you put yourself out there, man. I didn't do the Patreon plug. I'm going to do it quickly now. There's a Patreon page for this podcast, patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. If you're getting something from these episodes, and if you've come this far, perhaps you are. If you're being inspired, educated, motivated, if you're learning about new music, if you're just feeling the positive vibes and you want to support, you can do so via patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. I have one tier of membership. It is $5 a month. Think of it, as I always say, of tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do. If you sit back and you say, you know what, this is worth something to me and I want to support this cat, that's a way to do it. Another way to do it is to share the teasers that I do put out. Tell your friends, kids. You're getting something from this podcast and maybe they will too. Ratings and reviews are always most welcome. You can also buy my merch, john-huff.com/shop. I'm going to go. I got a rehearsal coming up, baby. Fresh Breath is coming over because we have a CD release show. Hey, I recorded that one too. November 11th in Kingsville. Follow Fresh Breath on your socials to find out more details about that. Would love to see you out because we made a really, really cool record. And we're going to play it front to back, and it's going to be a really fun night, all right? Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to the people who have responded to my little inquiries about this stuff. Thank you for the positive messages. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for being a part of this curious little community we have. Have a wonderful week, kids. Good things happen when you put yourself out there, and hey, I'll check you later. Yeah. Killing a bird with a knife, turning away from a life. All that I do isn't right, losing my way in the night. Ever reading, something's bleeding in my soul, and I can't seem to fill up the hole. And then there's this amazing chord that just junks the whole freaking song. Bittersweet by King's X. Everybody screws up, man. Be in the arena.